Hi, Preview staffers. Welcome to Module 3. I know you're all very excited to have another module coming at you so quickly, but as I'm sure you've figured out, we have a lot of information to get through, so I wanted to jump right in and get started. This module is going to be all about incoming credit, working with students that have AP, IB, or ACE credit that they're bringing in, and then also dual enrollment. So we'll start with the credit by exam, work our way to dual enrollment at the end, and yeah, hopefully you enjoy and don't fall asleep. Sorry. When we talk about credit by exam, like I said at the very beginning on the first slide, we're talking about AP, which is Advanced Placement, IB, which is International Baccalaureate, and ACE, which is Advanced International Certificate of Education. Those are the three main credit by exams that we are going to find students bringing in credit from. There are probably others. CLEP is one of them. We're not going to spend a lot of time or really any time talking about that. But if you do ever hear about CLEP, if a student's bringing in credit from CLEP, talk to your preview advisor or come find one of the troubleshooters and we can help you out there. But it's very rare, so I don't want to spend a lot of time just throwing more information at you than you need to know. As for dual enrollment, when we talk about dual enrollment, we are going to focus on essentially two different ways to approach it. The first is going to be for students that are bringing in dual enrollment from a public university or a state college in Florida. And then there's pretty much everything else. So that's going to be students that are going to bring in credit from like a private university in Florida or anything out of state. And the reason that we're going to differentiate between the two, as you'll find out, is because of how we evaluate those classes and what you're going to need to do when you're working with students who are bringing credits from these different areas, since it will impact what you're going to know at preview and what you're going to be able to help them with. Before we get into the specifics associated with credit by exams or with dual enrollment, I want to talk about just some general information as it regards to incoming credit for students at preview. It's really important to understand that credit is going to be awarded only once for the same course code. That seems really intuitive, but I do like to make a note of it because some students are going to bring in the same class from multiple sources. And that might be credit by exam, it might be dual enrollment, and it could also be from the UF course credit if they're planning on retaking a class once they're here at UF. And we'll go over an example on the next slide to kind of help make this more clear. Keep in mind also that UF course credit is going to take precedence over all other forms of credit of the same course. So if, let's say, for example, a student comes in and they earned dual enrollment credit for Calculus 1 and they got a C and they're thinking, you know what, I really want to take it again at UF and make sure I have a strong foundation before moving on to take, let's say, Calculus 2. Maybe they're thinking about an engineering major and they decide to retake Calc 1. That's fine. They absolutely can do that. But if, let's say, the student takes the class here and then drops it and goes, you know what, actually, I kind of just want to keep my Calc 1 credit from, or rather, they can do that if they drop it. If they take the class here and they don't pass it, let's say they get like a D or an E and they fail the course, then they're not allowed to then retroactively go back and say, just kidding, I'd rather have my credit coming from this other place. UF course credit is always going to supersede credit coming from other areas. So this is an example of what you might find when a student is bringing in credits, the same credit from multiple places. So for a student who possibly earned ENC 1101 credit through AP and then also earned ENC 1101 credit through dual enrollment, it's actually very common that we see this particular class repeated. There's a couple others that we might find, but the ENC 1101 is probably the one that happens more frequently than any others. In that situation, the student is not going to earn 6 credit hours. Even though they have the class coming from different places, again, it's the same prefix and number. They're going to earn 3 credit hours and that's it. The other question that some students might ask you is, well, but then do I still at least earn 12,000 words? Each class is 6,000 words that I got through AP and then also through dual enrollment. And the answer to that is also no. The student is earning credit for the class once, so 3 credits, and they're earning words for the class once, so 6,000 words. It doesn't matter that it may seem like it makes sense to have it the other way. They're only going to get credit for either one of those things once. Now, credit being awarded only once doesn't apply to having a course count in multiple gen ed categories. That's different because we're not awarding credit twice. We're just allowing the course to count in multiple areas. For example, if we look at a student who gets a 4 on IB theater, that's going to give the student credit for THE 2000, which is theater appreciation. Took me a second. THE 2000 gives the student Gen Ed Humanities and gives them Gen Ed Diversity. They only earn 3 credits, right? They're not earning 6 credits, but it applies and counts towards both the GEH and the GEN categories. This is commonly known as double dipping. It's a phrase that you might hear us throw around as advisors, and just so that you're aware, and we've talked about this with Gen Eds as well, classes can count, if they're international diversity, can count in multiple places with the other Gen Ed they're paired with. The student's just not receiving more than 3 credit hours towards their overall degree. As many of you probably know, students are going to bring in, not all, but a lot of our students are going to bring in incoming credit. That's why we're talking about all of this. But there is a limitation to how many hours they are allowed to use towards their degree. The credit by exam limit is 45 hours. Students can bring in up to 45 hours of credit by exam coursework to use towards their UF degree. Now, there is a caveat on this, and this is new, so this might not be something that applied to you, or well, definitely didn't apply to you coming in. This is a brand new fall Summer B 2019 thing. So make sure that you're not reversing back to kind of what applied only to you. This is different. Students can only bring in 30 hours from IB and 30 hours from ACE towards the 45. So if, let's say, for example, a student has 45 hours of IB coursework, even though the max limit is 45 hours, IB is capping it at 30, or rather UF is capping IB at 30. The same thing is true for ACE. Students can have all 45 hours count from AP, that's fine, but IB and ACE do have a cap on them and in terms of what can apply towards that 45 hours. Dual enrollment's limit is 60 hours. So students can bring in up to 60 hours of credit through dual enrollment to have count towards their UF degree. Now, these things aren't exclusive of each other, or rather they are exclusive of each other. I apologize. So students could hypothetically bring in 60 hours of dual enrollment and 45 hours of credit by exam. That's unlikely. That's a lot of coursework that the student would have done in high school. But just so you know, they don't overlap with each other. They are exclusive. The other thing is that applied hours can be rearranged. So if a student comes in and says, well, I brought in more than 45 hours by credit by exam, I have, 52, which hours are going to actually count? I want to choose. The university automatically determines that for them on their audit, but the student can come in and meet with an advisor once they're here on campus, and we can always rearrange that if we need to based on if they're repeating any courses or if they change their major. The audit does a really good job of actually taking the things that are going to be the most applicable to their degree at the time of the sorting. But if they don't like what hours are counting, we can always rearrange that for them once they're here on campus. And this is just another way to kind of see it. Again, I'm a visual learner. We've talked about this, I think, in Module 1. But this is just another way for you to kind of see the breakdown of what it is that students can have. So we've got, of course, our incoming credit at the top, and then if we're going over to the left, we've got our credit by exam, which, like we talked about, max is 45 hours. And as you can see from that, we can take up to 45 hours from AP, but only 30 hours from IB and only 30 hours from ACE. For dual enrollment, our max is 60 hours, and we can take up to 60 hours from that state college and SUS, which is the state university system institutions, and then up to 60 hours from out of state. Again, our cap is 60 hours in total for dual enrollment, and our cap is 45 hours in total for credit by exam. But you can see there's a couple specifics that we want to talk about or focus on in that breakdown one step further, like with IB and ACE. Okay, now that we've covered the basics, let's go ahead and start talking about the specifics related to credit by exam. So we're going to start with AP being advanced placement. So the passing score, as many of you or all of you should know at this point because it was on your homework 1, is a 3 or higher, which means that a student could earn a 3, 4, or 5 on the AP exam and earn credit towards UF. You always want to be sure that you're paying attention to the name of the exam. So the ones that are probably commonly interpreted or misconstrued are going to be English language versus English literature, and then Calculus AB versus Calculus BC. The reason I'm bringing this up is because English language, if a student gets a 3 on that exam, they're going to get credit for ANC 1101. If a student gets a 3 on English literature, they're going to get credit for AML 2070. Both of those classes are composition, but only one of them is a state core. So it is important to make sure that we're noting and we're paying attention to that if a student's saying, oh, I got a 3 on the English exam for AP, to clarify which one they're talking about. Same thing is true for Calculus AB and BC. Again, almost the exact same title. It's super confusing. But make sure that you are identifying which one the student's talking about to make sure that you're giving the best possible advising. The chart for AP is going to be in the preview workbook. So it's not like you're going to have to memorize all of this, but you are going to want to be familiar with how the chart works, which we're actually going to talk about on the next slide. Okay, so this is actually a screenshot of the chart in the undergraduate catalog, which is also something that students are going to be looking at and you might use. I have a little bit later what it looks like in the preview workbook, but just for right now, we're going to look at the catalog chart. As you can see on here, you've got on the far left, you've got the name of the exam, and then you've got each column is going to be designated to each score that the student might earn. What I want to draw your attention to right now is the fact that at the top it does note 3 credits exam unless otherwise noticed if they get a score of 3, 6 credits per exam unless otherwise noticed for a score of 4 and 5. That's fair, but it's not always accurate. And the unless otherwise noted is actually probably more common than not, if you will. And just for example, if you look, biology starts right off the bat not actually being the same as what it's saying. So the score of 3, it says 3 credits, you actually get 4. For score of 5, you get 8 credits as opposed to 6. So it's not 100% accurate. Calculus AB, same thing. It's 4 credits across the board, not the same thing as 3 or 6. So while it's fair to say that a student may earn more credits if they have a higher score on any particular exam, it tends to not be true in a lot of situations. So I actually try to stay away from that concept because it can be a little confusing and also can be frustrating to students when they find out that they didn't actually earn more if they got a 5 versus a 3, as in the case of Calculus AB right here that you can see, didn't earn more credits. So just be very careful with the language that you use in regards to this. International Baccalaureate, or IB as it's commonly called. Now for IB, the passing score is a little bit different. As opposed to a 3, 4, 5, which is what we had for AP, we're talking now about a 4, 5, 6, and 7. The big thing about this is that we want to note for IB, there is no difference between students who take the higher level or standard level examinations. Now, if you're not sure what we're talking about, don't stress about what that means exactly, or rather that the fact that there are different examinations, but some students might mention like, well, but I did the higher level IB exam for this, or the standard level IB exam. You can just let them know, doesn't matter which one they took, it's going to be based on the specific test that they did and then also based on the score that they earned. It's not going to be based on whether or not it was higher level or standard level. With IB, you also want to pay attention to the math exams. So like we were talking about with the similar names in regards to AP, IB, the thing I think that throws most people off is going to be math. If a student says, well, I did IB math, you always want to clarify which one they mean because there are 3 different ones to look at. There's math studies, there's further mathematics, also known as advanced math, and then there's just mathematics. So it can be very confusing. They're all listed very clearly in the preview workbook for you to look at, but just make sure that if a student's throwing around IB math as the term or the test that they took, that you get that clarifying information from them. And again, this chart will also be in the preview workbook, so easy access for you. But again, we're looking at the undergraduate catalog screenshot, so stick with me on this. Now, you'll notice that this is going to look very similar to AP, one less column, because we are grouping all of the scores of 5 through 7 into one specific awarding of credit, as opposed to it being different for 5, 6, and 7. It's essentially just, did you earn a passing score? If so, was it a 4 or was it a 5 or higher? That's really where the differentiation between what's awarded is going to happen. Now, again, you've got your list on the left of the name of the test the students took. But I do want to draw your attention to something, and this was also on the other one as well, but I just wanted to point it out here. You'll notice that next to English language and literature, there's a little footnote that's marked there. That actually means that the test itself awards the student words or writing requirement credit. Now, if it is in fact on the test, that means that every class that's being awarded is going to give the student 6,000 words. So in the case of English language and literature, if a student earns a 4, they're going to get 6,000 words. If a student earns a 6, let's say, they're going to get 12,000 words because they're getting credit for ENC 1101 and 1102, both of which are going to give the student 6,000 words each. We're going to look at an example with ACE that's going to actually be a little bit different, so I just want you to remember that. But this is what it's going to look like in the undergraduate catalog to let you know that a student is going to earn words for any particular test. The other thing I want to note is that on the far right column, and this was the case for the AP chart as well, in the far right column, it's actually telling you gen ed credit that the student is earning. So for example, with biology, you'll notice there's a B there. That means that all of the credit that the student is earning in this row is going to give them gen ed biological science credit. Now for economics, let's jump down there. You'll notice that they're denoting which classes are actually going to earn gen ed credit because not all of them will give them to the student. So if a student gets a 6 on IB economics, they're going to get gen ed social behavioral science credit for ECO 2013 and ECO 2023. If they earned, let's say, a 4, they would get elective credit for ECO L000, but because it doesn't have any equivalent here at UF, there is no gen ed credit associated to it. They are going to get hours towards their degree, but they're not going to get gen ed credit, and that's why it's specifying there on the far right what it is and is not going to apply to. And then last but not least, and I kind of already talked about this, but just in case to kind of highlight it, there are going to be courses that you're going to see throughout. You'll notice that there's a GEB L000, there's a Chem L000 for the lab there. There are different classes that are going to be marked, and they usually have that one footnote next to them as well. Those are classes that don't have an equivalent here at UF, and so they're just considered elective credit. You're never going to have those classes be awarded gen ed. They're never going to be awarded words. They're just going to come in and be hours that a student can earn towards their degree. ACE. So I'm not going to say the whole name. It's exhausting. But if we're talking about ACE, ACE is a little bit different than AP/IB. For a passing score for ACE, the student is going to earn an A through E score, which sounds kind of weird, but don't worry about it. If a student says that they passed ACE, that's really all that you need to know. The score you earn does not determine how many classes or credits you're going to be awarded. So it's really just did they pass the exam or not. What's going to determine how many credit hours they may or may not receive is going to actually be determined by if they took the class as an A or an AS level. So that's actually going to be determined by what row you're looking at, which we'll see in a second when we jump to the next slide. A level means that the student took the class for 2 years, so they have a higher, hypothetically, a more developed knowledge in that particular subject area, versus the AS level, which means that they studied that subject for 1 year. Some exams only offer through AS or A level, so you may see that as an option, but a lot of the exams are going to have both as choices for the student to note when they're going over it. And again, the chart will be in the preview workbook, so easy access for you to find. As promised, here we finally have the workbook page, so you can see what that looks like in regards to the ACE awarding of credits. So as you can see, I highlighted at the top of the page where it talks about the writing requirement and the L000 course number that doesn't provide general education credit as a reminder. You may notice that these are flipped in terms of what the order is in the undergraduate catalog. The writing requirement only has 1 asterisk here, whereas it has it has the number 2, I guess, but the equivalent of 2 asterisks in the undergraduate catalog. We're actually going to change that so that they are mirroring each other, so it's a little bit less confusing. So while you're going to see on here that 1 asterisk means the writing requirement, it's actually going to change to 2 in the workbook for 2019 so that it matches more closely what we're going to see in the catalog. Just kind of an FYI. Now, a couple things that I wanted to bring attention to. So obviously, just to let you or note again that if there's an asterisk or there's that number 2 in the exam title on the far left, that means that all of the courses that the student is earning in that row are going to give the student 6,000 words each. However, you may see that in some circumstances, you're only going to get a credit, you're only going to get words for one of the classes as opposed to both. In that situation, you're going to see the asterisk next to the actual number of the course. So for the example with English language in that row, what I circled there, ENC 1101 is going to give the student 6,000 words. You'll notice again that they're going to have that 6,000 words attributed if they did the A level. LIT 2000 does not give the student 6,000 words. If it did, then the asterisk would actually be next to English language, similar to the one below it in English literature. So that's how you can tell the difference. If it's in the actual ACE exam title row, that means that all of the courses are going to give you 6,000 words in that row. If it's actually next to the course itself, then it's specifying that just that one course is what actually gives you words. And then just to, complete our review, letting you know there's the L000, same thing as it looked like with AP and IB. When we were looking in the undergraduate catalog, it's going to have some denotation there, probably going to be 1 asterisk and not 2 like we talked about, but just drawing attention to that. So general information about credit by exam. The student is going to see a P on their transcript, but it doesn't factor into their GPA because what they're doing is they're getting a passing grade on a test. It's not like they're getting an A, B, C, D, or E. That's not how it works. So nothing that the student brings in credit for through credit by exam is going to give them a grade, which means no GPA applicability. A higher score, and this is just a reminder, we already talked about this, but a higher score doesn't always mean that you're going to earn more credit hours. We want to be careful that we're not perpetuating that stereotype or myth. And then earning a credit for a prerequisite course through accelerated mechanisms or through credit by exam doesn't always mean students are prepared for the next class in the sequence. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're great and ready to go. But there are going to be some classes where the student is just not going to have the same level of understanding if they took the class here at UF in preparation for that next step. And that's going to be something we're going to talk about a lot more as we get into placement and start talking about case studies and how to apply this to individual students. But it's good to keep in mind that it's not cut and dry. There are going to be other things that you're going to have to evaluate when trying to figure out if a student should move forward or repeat a class in any particular area. This is really important. A passing score will always give you credit at the University of Florida. So if a student earns a 3 or higher on AP or a 4 or higher on IB, they are going to earn credit for something. How many credits, what type of credits is going to be determined by the class and what it is that they are getting. It could be gen ed credit, it could be words towards the writing requirement, credit towards a major, towards a minor, or it could just be elective credit, as in the case of the L000 classes, but the student's always going to get something. A lot of students will talk about how, they pass their exams, but because it's not meeting some specific requirement, they're like, well, I didn't really get anything from that. You definitely want to help explain to them that that's not true. They are getting elective credit, which can help reduce any number of other, just their elective hours they need to finish their degree. It applies towards the 120, which of course is still going to be valuable for them because it opens up more space to take other classes or to graduate faster if they want to. We already talked about this, but just to recap, L000 does not have an equivalency at UF. So it doesn't meet gen ed requirements. It's never going to help the student towards the writing requirement. The whole point of having the L000 is to let you know that there is no equivalent here at the University of Florida. The other thing is that less common exams may not be in the preview workbook. You may have a student who comes in who talks about an exam they took through ACE or AP or IB or something, and you're looking in the workbook and you're thinking, okay, the student is making this up because this does not exist. The workbook has the most popular exams, but there are a couple extra that we don't see. They're not as common. And so if a student mentions one to you, go ahead and look in the undergraduate catalog instead and see if it's listed there. If it's not, Then we would refer the student to the registrar's office for follow-up after preview to see what the deal is and maybe what credit they're going to have awarded and why it's not listed anywhere that we can find. But first step is always going to be use the preview workbook. It's going to be the most easily accessible to you, then the catalog if needed, and then the registrar's office, again, after preview, not during preview, if they need to. Now, as you probably already thought about or maybe experienced when you were at preview, scores for the credit by exam, so the accelerated mechanisms, AP, IB, ACE, those are going to arrive usually in early July. That means that we've got about 15 to 16 freshman preview sessions where we are not going to have scores for the students from their senior year. Now, we might have scores from their sophomore or junior year. We may have that information already, or rather we should have that information already because that's already happened. But anything that has to do with their senior year, we're going to have to do a lot of prediction advising, and we're going to talk about what that means and how it applies to the students as we go through the next couple slides. Because students are going to predict their scores, that means that there is different advising that needs to be done. They're going to input their predictions on preview prep. We talked about what preview prep is at the labs. We've talked about preview prep in class at the PATS retreat. So this is hopefully something that you're familiar with, but on their preview prep sheet, that's really where you're going to see any of their self-reported information about what they think their scores are. Now, most students are actually pretty accurate when we look at the data about what they think they're going to get. So it's not like you have to be super cynical or wary of every student that you talk to and think, man, okay, you're overselling what you're probably going to earn. Most of them are pretty spot on with what they think they're going to do, and that's why we can use those predictions to help advise our students. So let's do a prediction play-by-play, just so that I can walk you through kind of like what might happen and how it might apply to a student or what you might experience at preview. So we have a student who, let's say, takes an AP Psych exam the end of their senior year, okay? They complete preview prep, predict a 4 on AP Psych. So on that preview prep sheet that's going to be printed out during or the morning of their preview session, on there it's going to show their AP scores that they took or AP tests that they took, and then what scores they're predicting or have earned if it's from prior to senior year, and list all of them there for you and the student to look at. So you're going to review the preview prep sheet, and you're going to notice this note that the student has predicted credit for PSY 2012, which is what they would earn if they are predicting a 4. A 4 in AP Psych is going to give a student PSY 2012 credit. Let's say the student wants to major in psychology. This is important because it actually then means the PSY 2012, which is Intro to Psych, is something that we may need to use as a prediction class because the student might want to move forward in that material. If it was a class that was in an area of no interest to the student, then the rest of this prediction play-by-play becomes moot. So once you know the student wants to major in psychology and you've noted on the prep sheet, you're like, okay, I have to make sure I have to follow up with the student on this. You're going to make a class recommendation. You obviously want to check in Term 1 tracking for psych, but you also are going to probably recommend that they take a psych class to help explore that major, since that is what they indicated they would like to pursue. Now, you're not going to recommend probably PSY 2012. The student already has credit for it. There's no reason for them to repeat it. You're going to probably look at appropriate upper division psych class recommendations for the student to consider that are going to be listed in the preview workbook, which is how you'll know that they're appropriate, freshman friendly or freshman appropriate coursework, and make recommendations based off of that. The advisor then on day 2, when they're meeting with the student, is going to then give them permission to register for those upper division psych classes because the student will meet the prerequisite of prediction. For most classes, we can accept predictions as a way to meet prerequisites when at preview. Otherwise, things would go off the rails if we couldn't do predictions. Think about the sheer number of classes that we help students register for or advise students to take that are based off of a predictive score from AP IB or ACE. It's a lot. So the student is going to have that permission from the advisor to be able to register for the class. And the advisor or the staffer, depending on if they're the registration lab or they're still meeting with their advisor for registration, both of you potentially, you're going to remind the student to make sure that, if the prediction is wrong, if they miscalculated what they're going to earn, the student should remember to change their schedule. We do have a lot of purge lists that we go through, and we'll check to make sure that students meet prerequisites once the semester starts and the scores have posted, but it's a lot easier on the student if they're the ones who are proactively changing their schedule if they need to. If in fact they find out in July that their prediction was off and they didn't actually earn credit for PSY 2012 as they originally thought that they would. Now, what are some common prediction classes that you might see? Besides the PSY 2012, which is going to be on here, you are going to see a lot of prediction appropriate or placement input consent for upper level freshman appropriate psychology classes. The examples I have on here are developmental psych and abnormal psych, very popular ones that students will select. You'll also see a lot of post ENC 1101 composition class requests. So students are going to want to maybe take their second composition class, which might be ENC 1102 or AML 2070, but they're going to have ENC 1101 as a prerequisite. If the student's predicting a 3 or higher on, let's say, AP English language and composition, then that would be something where we would say, okay, sure, predictions are fine. Let's go ahead and give you the input consent to register for these classes for the time being. Other classes that are probably maybe not as frequent, but things that we'll still see. Math probably pretty frequent, but Spanish, intermediate Spanish or higher, if a student is bringing in intermediate Spanish 1 or 2 but wants to continue in the language, we'll do a lot of prereq input consents for that. And for math classes, if a student is predicting, you know, a 4 or 5 on AP Calculus AB, then they might want to take Calc 2, and so it's okay for the student to get input consent for those higher level math classes as appropriate based on what the student is interested in pursuing. Now, there are certain classes where we are not going to accept predictions to help a student enroll. So that list that we just went through, those are all fine. For the most part, in most circumstances, we will accept predictions in almost all classes except for these. This is really because students sometimes have a little bit more difficult of a time trying to navigate how well they will or will not do. And these are also some of the more popular classes that we find. So it's a lot easier to not have to purge later, but just wait and verify that they have the scores that they need to be able to register for these classes. As you can see, this is going to be classes that are leading up into calculus. So you've got that basic college algebra, pre-calculus algebra, pre-calc, calc 1, and survey of calc. We will not accept predictions for any of those classes. The students actually have to show proof that they have those courses or those prerequisites met before they can move into the coursework. Now, what those prerequisites are, don't stress about it right now. We're going to cover that when we get to placement. But for the time being, it's important to note that there are classes like the ones listed here that are non-negotiable in terms of predictions to be able to register for them. Now, you'll notice that Chem 1 and General Chem 1 for engineers are listed here, but they're italicized. That's because there's going to be a little bit of flexibility in there for some of the predictions, but only in certain circumstances. And again, if that sounds confusing, I really hope that it won't be, but we will take a lot of time to go over it when we get to that module during placement, I promise. But just for right now, just be aware that there are restrictions to the predictions. Rhyming it up here, my own. Well, I was going to say Lin-Manuel Miranda, but let's be real. That's just such a high, lofty goal, and he's a brilliant man. And I digress. I've been doing this for a while now. We'll move forward. When we talk about confirmed scores, we're talking about transcripts for dual enrollment. We're talking about confirmed exam scores, not predicted exam scores like they're doing on Preview Prep. Preview Prep is predicted, it's self-reported, right? We need confirmed things that we can actually verify. Or completed ALEX exam could also be something that we could use for these courses as appropriate based on their score that they get. So before we move into talking about dual enrollment, I just wanted to go over 2 reminders that you're going to want to make sure that you are giving to your students in regards to AP IB ACE credit by examination incoming credit coursework. Always make sure the exam prediction matches the actual scores earned. We kind of talked about this as it relates to some of the other courses early on, but just make sure to remind the student to check to make sure that everything matches up and that they still have all the prereqs they need to be able to take the classes they've selected at preview. And then also check to make sure scores are posted on transcript by the beginning of the fall term. What happens is that if they don't stay on top of this and double check to make sure their scores were sent correctly, that they're posted correctly, what can happen is that, one, it might affect their registration date because they don't have all their hours posted at UF. And two, it might impact their ability to register for certain classes because it's not going to recognize they have the prerequisites yet. So that can also be potentially problematic. So you just want to encourage students to check the beginning of fall to make sure that they have everything posted as they should by admissions. Dual enrollment, so exciting. I'm feeling the effects of the presentation at this point, but we're gonna keep going. We're gonna fight through it, you and me together. Here we go. Dual enrollment. It's exciting. All right, so as we talked about at the very beginning of this module, there are two different types of dual enrollment as it relates to what we're going to talk about. You've got your SUS, or your state university system institutions, and if you're not sure what I mean by that, those are our four-year public universities in the state of Florida. That's going to be your FAU, your USF, your UF, of course, your UCF, your UNF, any of the four-year public schools. I believe there's 11 or 12 of them. I should know, and I don't off the top of my head. I'm sorry. That's going to be what we're talking about. And then our state colleges in Florida. So that's going to be Santa Fe College, Broward College, Brevard, FSCJ, Florida State College of Jacksonville. There's so many more. But those are going to be what we talk about when we are talking about SUS and state colleges in Florida. Those schools are going to have a prefix and a number that is going to be relatively similar, if not match our own classes. I apologize, I'm going to cough. Hold on. Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you for sticking with me on that. The prefix and number, because of the Common Course numbering system, which we're going to talk about in a second, there's a reason why you're able to have all of those things match up in the same way. It's actually a very helpful tool that Florida uses, and we will dive into that in a little bit. And then, of course, we have all of our other courses, which are out-of-state or private universities in Florida. And those are courses that are going to be given a prefix and an L000 or a T000 number, along with like a prefix similar to our own. And that's because they don't have a specific course equivalency here at UF automatically. They're going to come in as just elective credit until we can determine how they might specifically apply to any sort of degree, because it's not automatically done by the state of Florida as it is for the SUS and state colleges. Okay, so I paused after that last slide to take a delicious slurp of my Diet Coke. It was delightful. I love a good Diet Coke. In case you're ever wondering what my favorite drink is a Diet Coke. Anyways, I digress. So dual enrollment course equivalency. Wow, that was tough for me. I don't know why. There was nothing in the Diet Coke. It was just Diet Coke, I swear. So dual enrollment course equivalency. This is the Common Course numbering system I was mentioning on the last slide. Common Course numbering system says that if the prefix of the class and the last three digits of the course number match up, then they are equivalent to the course at UF. So for the example that I have on the slide here, A&T, whatever it is, 301, so it could be A&T 1301 or 3301, is going to be equivalent to A&T 2301, which is a course that is taught at UF. It's Human Sexuality and Culture. That is going to be the same class. Same thing is true for Chem blank 045. You've got our CHM, which is our prefix, and the last three numbers, the 045. So if a course is, let's say, Chem 1045 at Broward College, it's going to be the same as Chem 2045 at UF because the prefix and the last three numbers match up. That means, according to the Common Course numbering system, it is the same equivalent class to UF. Now, again, keep in mind, this only applies to SUS and state colleges in Florida. It doesn't apply to out-of-state colleges because they don't fall under the Common Course numbering system. This is something that only the state of Florida has done for its public schools, okay? Now, what happens if a dual enrollment class doesn't have a course equivalent at UF? We're going to talk about that because it is important to note that not every course that's taught here is taught everywhere else and vice versa. You may have taken a course while you were, let's say, at Santa Fe College dual enrollment that isn't a course that we even teach here at UF. How does that match up when you get here? And we'll talk about that in a second. So moving away from course equivalency, which is a very specific set of rules that we can evaluate a course for, now we're moving into dual enrollment course evaluation. And that is applying specifically to the classes taken at the SUS State College that do not have a course equivalent automatically at UF. So we don't have that prefix and last three number match up here because the course doesn't exist here. It also is going to apply to private universities in Florida and then out-of-state dual enrollment. So those three areas are what we're talking about when we talk about course evaluation steps. So let's actually walk through this and see where this takes us. So I want to, again, I'm a visual aid person. I want to walk us through kind of the possibilities of how this would work if you were working with a student. So if you have a student preview, your first question or first thing that you're going to check on the prep sheet is, where did the student take the class, right? If they took it at a Florida State College or public university, that's going to be on the left side. We're going to follow that track for a second. So our next question is going to be, now that we've established where they took it, is this course the same as the one taught at UF as evaluated by the Common Course Numbering System? So that means, does it have a course equivalent here at the University of Florida? Does it have a prefix and last three number match to us here at UF? And if so, then the student's all set. We don't have to worry about anything. It's automatically being evaluated and reviewed and accepted as the equivalent course at UF. We're good to go. If the answer is no, then we're going to go through the course evaluation process. Now, let's say the student's answer to that very first question is, I took this class at Duke University, or I took it at the University of Wisconsin, the best school out there, just saying. If they did, then the Common Course numbering does not apply. It doesn't have anything to do with this. Again, the Common Course numbering is only applicable to the left side of these options. So Common Course numbering goes out the window. We're going to have to go through the course evaluation process in this situation if the student answers Florida Private University or out of state. So let's actually get into how do we evaluate the courses as we've been talking about on the past few slides. What do we do if a student is bringing in credit from one of those three scenarios that we just discussed? So again, as a recap, we've got a private university, we've got in the state of Florida, we've got out-of-state schools, public and private, and then we've got the situation where a student has a class from a public state college or university, but it's not a class that we offer or have an equivalent here at UF, so what do? The first two options, the out-of-state and the private university, is going to be what applies to this first component. We're not going to actually bring in the public, state, or state college option evaluation until the second bullet, which I'll explain in a second. So for private universities or out of state, the first thing we want to do is verify the student is actually going to earn credit at UF, okay? That's going to be our first step, is to make sure that they are going to be awarded credit here. That's going to be done through the UF admissions office. That's where we would refer a student after preview if we needed to verify it. Now, chances are, if it's a accredited institution, if it's a public institution outside of the state, chances are they're going to have credit awarded. How many hours is going to be determined by the admissions office. So again, we want to always make sure we're referring students there for any specific questions about that. But for the most part, chances are they are going to earn credit of some kind at UF. We just don't know how much, and we don't exactly know what. Now, once we've determined that they actually are going to have credit counting at UF, the next two steps are going to be important if they wanted to count towards something specific. Now, if a student wants credit that they've taken someplace else, or this is where we bring in that third bullet point again. So if the student has credit for a class that is from a Florida public university or from a state university, so college or university in the state of Florida, but it's not something that has an immediate course equivalency here, then in addition to the private university and the out-of-state universities, to verify a student is going to have gen ed credit awarded, the student is going to have to go to their college, okay? So what I mean by that, if let's say you have a finance major who really wants, they took AMH 2342 or they have AMH L0000 from, let's go back to Duke University, but they really want that class to count as a gen ed humanities, they're going to go to the College of Business. Your natural thought might be, well, it seems like it's AMH, that's a history class, they should go talk to liberal arts and sciences. No, their college, which finance is located in the College of Business Administration, Their college is going to be the ones that determine general education credits and how they're awarded towards their degree. So in this situation, the student would go to the College of Business. Now let's say they want to have the class count as something specific. Then they want to go to the department that offers the equivalent class. So let's say this finance major is really interested in a history minor, right? It's not just we want Gen Ed Humanities credit. Now we want to make sure that the class actually can apply towards a history minor, something very specific. Then we would want the student to go talk to the history department. We want them to go to the department that offers the class to evaluate it at a much smaller micro level, right? This is pretty much kind of like zooming in on a microscope as we go along. Our very broad evaluation is going to be, does the student even get credit to begin with? That's admissions. Then it's, well, okay, the student wants Gen Ed credit. That's a much broader piece of a next step in, but still a very broad piece of evaluation. Then it's just the college evaluating the coursework. If the student wants it to be zoomed in even further, on my microscope analogy, if we want to zoom in even further and make sure that it actually is specifically equivalent to something here at the University of Florida in a specific area of focus, then they're going to go to the department that offers that class. We want to be careful that when we're explaining this to a student, one, that we do so in a way that's easy to understand, which I recognize is convoluted right now, but also that you are specific about where they have to go. It's not just helpful to be able to say, oh, you want to know about Gen Ed credit? Go to your college. Be specific. Go to the College of Business. Oh, you want to see if that class is going to count towards a history minor? You should talk to, the department. Which department? Which college? Where are you sending them? Always be specific about what the next step is. Otherwise, we're kind of just we're doing our job half-assed. We're not actually following through on what the student needs to do next, which is an important part of advising, is sometimes just being a great resource and referral. And again, this is the example I had. I went back to the history one, but just to kind of go over this as well. If you have MAC L000, let's say the student's bringing this in from out of state, Calculus 1 is the name of the class that the student says it is. Is it equivalent to MACL 2311? We don't really know, but if the student wants to make sure that it is exactly equivalent, we would send them to the math department. If they just wanted to know if they got Gen Ed credit for the class, we would send them to their college. So challenges at preview. As you can imagine, there's going to be challenges in regards to dual enrollment evaluation at preview, because you are going to be doing things that are based off of predictions, similar to the credit by examination, which can be challenging. You're also going to have to sometimes go based off of your instincts as opposed to specific facts. At least with credit by exam, you know what the student's earning credit for hypothetically based on their prediction. With this, sometimes you have to kind of just go based on what it seems like. And you're going to have a lot of people around you to help you with that. If you have questions or concerns, you're going to have Sean as your academic coordinator. You're going to have your other staffers. You're going to have Nigel and I, who are going to still be around and available via email or text. And then also troubleshooters and your advisors. So don't hesitate to reach out if you're not sure about something, because we recognize that this is going to be complicated and individual for each of our students. But for the sake of kind of just going over this some more and walking through some different options or scenarios, let's take a look at what I have on here. So you might have a student who comes in who says, well, I took Composition 1 when I was at Miami University, down in Miami. And it's like, okay, so we don't know the specific, it doesn't fall under our common course numbering, right, because it's a private university. So we know it's going to come up as ENC L000. But the class is called Composition 1. Is it going to be Gen Ed Composition? I can't guarantee that, but it sounds pretty good to me. So I would probably have that student, if they didn't want to take a composition class their first semester, steer clear of that until they can have the class evaluated once they're here on campus, right? So we take into account what it sounds like, what it might apply to, and then make good judgment or recommendations advising from there. So let's say we have a student who has DEP 2004. This is actually a common class that's taught at different state colleges in Florida. So it falls under the common course number. It's a prefix in the number. We have it all set up already, but it doesn't have an equivalent here at UF. So this is one of those classes that we don't have an equivalent for here. Called Developmental Psychology. Now, it's clearly not the exact same course as DEP 3053. Otherwise, it would be DEP 2053, right? But it's called Developmental Psychology, so perhaps it's similar to the one that we have here at UF. Now, if a student was a psych major and they were asking you, well, should I take developmental psych here? I probably would say, well, I don't know. Let's have you wait and talk to a psych advisor once you're here, or maybe email them once you're done with preview to find out more about this. But there are things that you can do to help kind of mitigate problems that might come up, such as having a student take a class that, while it is a different prefix and number, is not the same material, which means they might be really bored and not challenged, or have any growth when they're here on campus in their first term. So it's better off to kind of wait and, again, using your judgment based on what information you have to maybe have the student, kind of exercise caution with what classes they're selecting based on the info you know. You're making an educated guess. That's the terminology I was trying to find, and I could not say. I was rambling on. Make an educated guess as to what it may count for based on the name. And then use that guess to recommend appropriate courses to the student. If only I had waited, and I would have been so much more eloquent with that part. But hey, you know what? We got there in the end. That counts for something. We're so close to the end, guys. I promise. We're there. All right, grades at other institutions. Keep in mind that grades at other schools are not going to impact the UF GPA. UF GPA is exactly what it sounds like. It is UF courses only, University of Florida only. Now, grades at other institutions are going to impact the overall GPA, because the overall GPA, as we talked about in Module 1, is everything, and could impact tracking GPA if applicable. Now, if a student is a psych major and they took psych courses at another institution, then yes, going to probably factor into their tracking GPA. If they are a math major and they took psych courses at another institution, probably not going to factor in, because math is only going to be looking for math classes. So double check to make sure everything is counting, or check to make sure that where everything should count, and if it applies to the tracking GPA, make sure you're mentioning that to the student. But ultimately, that's going to be something the advisor is probably going to talk to them about, so you don't have to think about that too much when working with them. And then just as a reminder, we talked about this at the very front end of the presentation. Students can bring in up to 60 hours of dual enrollment credit to count toward their degree, plus the 45 hours for AP, IB, ACE exams. If applicable, again, we've got that 30-hour caveat for IB and ACE. But just to go over again, the number of hours a student can bring in. And oh my gosh, we made it. My throat is like, that was, made that noise for you. I don't know. That's okay. Anyway, so we're there. We finished. Hooray. Good job. You made it to the end. So many points for you. So if you have questions about this module, I hope you wrote them down. You can always email me, but keep in mind, we're actually going to go over module 2 and 3 in more depth and answer any questions that may have come up in class on Thursday of next week. So this is going to hopefully go live. Today is Tuesday, so either today or tomorrow on Wednesday. You're going to have a homework assigned with this. Excuse me, throat is going. Hopefully you have a homework assigned with this module that'll go up as well. If you have questions about that, don't hesitate to text or email me. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this crazy adventure into incoming credits, and I will see you soon at the academic labs. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.